The high desert wind cuts across the plains of central Wyoming with a persistence that feels almost personal. In the autumn of 1995, that same wind carried away the laughter of a child who would never come home. On October 17, 1995, in the small ranching community of Riverton, Wyoming, 4-year-old Sarah Beth Larson disappeared from her own backyard while her father watched television inside. The search that followed would involve hundreds of volunteers, tracker dogs, helicopters, and a community that refused to believe one of their own could be responsible. For 28 years, Sarah Beth's fate remained unknown, her family shattered by suspicion and silence, until a deathbed confession in 2023 would finally reveal the truth about what happened that cold October afternoon. But the truth, when it came, would shake Riverton to its foundation, because the person responsible had been there all along, hiding in plain sight, trusted and unsuspected. The question that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades was simple, terrible, and seemingly unanswerable. How does a child vanish from her own backyard in broad daylight without a single witness? And why did the one person who should have been watching her seem so strangely unconcerned? Riverton sits in the Wind River basin of central Wyoming, a landscape where the earth stretches flat and endless in every direction, interrupted only by distant mountain ranges that rise like promises on the horizon. In 1995, the town held roughly 9,000 souls, most of them connected to ranching, the nearby Wind River Indian Reservation, or the handful of businesses that serviced both. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where children played outside until the streetlights came on, where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. The Larson family lived on Sunset Drive, a modest street of single-story ranch houses built in the 1970s, each with a small square of lawn in front and a larger yard in back. The houses were separated by chain-link fences in varying states of repair, the kind of neighborhood where dogs barked at passing cars and basketball hoops stood sentinel in driveways. Michael Larson, 29 years old, worked as a mechanic at Bighorn Tire and Auto. His wife, Jennifer, 27, worked part-time at the Safeway on Federal Boulevard, her schedule arranged around the needs of their 2 daughters. Sarah Beth was 4, with blonde hair that fell past her shoulders and a gap-toothed smile that appeared in every family photograph. Her sister, Emma, was 18 months old, still learning to walk with the determined wobble of toddlers everywhere. October 17, 1995, was a Tuesday. The temperature that afternoon hovered in the low 50s, cool enough for a jacket but not yet winter cold. The sky held that particular quality of autumn light, sharp and clear, the sun already beginning its long descent toward the western mountains. Jennifer Larson had the morning shift at Safeway. She left the house at 7:15, after making sure Michael was awake, after checking that Sarah Beth's backpack was ready for preschool, after writing a note on the refrigerator about what to thaw for dinner. Michael Larson took Sarah Beth to Little Learners Preschool at 8:30, a converted church basement on Major Avenue where 12 children spent 3 hours each morning learning letters and numbers. He picked her up at 11:45, Emma strapped into her car seat in back, Sarah Beth chattering about the finger painting they had done, about how Tommy had cried when he fell off the slide, about whether they could get McDonald's for lunch. Michael said no to McDonald's. They had leftovers at home. The Larson house at 2847 Sunset Drive had a backyard that measured roughly 40 feet by 30 feet, bordered on 3 sides by a 4-foot chain-link fence that was missing several support posts. The back gate, which opened onto an alley used primarily for trash collection, had a latch that did not always catch properly. The yard contained a swing set, rust showing through blue paint on the frame, one swing hanging still while the other twisted on its chains. A plastic slide, faded from red to pink, stood near the back fence. A sandbox made from railroad ties occupied the northwest corner, filled with toys. A yellow dump truck, a purple bucket, several small shovels. At 12:15, according to Michael's later statement to police, he made lunch, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for Sarah Beth, cut up hot dogs for Emma, apple juice in sippy cups. Sarah Beth ate half her sandwich, then asked if she could go play outside. Michael said yes. He could see her through the kitchen window. The weather was nice. She needed to burn off energy before her afternoon nap. At 12:25, Michael put Emma down in her crib. The baby was tired, fussy, rubbing her eyes. She went asleep almost immediately. Michael returned to the kitchen, washed the lunch dishes, then moved to the living room. The television was on, tuned to a football game, Denver versus Kansas City. Michael sat down on the brown corduroy couch that faced away from the backyard, away from the window. Those who have ever been parents know the mathematics of childcare, the constant mental calculation of where your child is, what they are doing, whether they are safe. For those who have trusted that a backyard is secure, that a Tuesday afternoon holds no danger, that the 5 minutes you look away will be just 5 minutes, what happened next will feel like a violation of some fundamental law of the universe. At 1:05, by Michael's account, he went to check on Sarah Beth. He opened the back door. The swing hung still. The slide stood empty. The sandbox toys lay scattered, the yellow dump truck on its side next to the purple bucket. Sarah Beth was gone. Michael called her name. The wind carried it away across the empty yard. He walked to the back gate, found it slightly ajar, the latch not engaged. He stepped into the alley, looked both directions. Nothing. No small blonde girl in a pink jacket. No sound except the wind and a dog barking 3 houses down. He ran back inside, checked the bathroom, her bedroom, the closets, places a 4-year-old might hide during a game. He called her name, louder now, his voice taking on an edge that made Emma stir in her crib. Nothing. He went back outside, walked the perimeter of the fence, calling. The neighbor's yard stood empty. The alley stretched in both directions, gravel and weeds and the backs of houses revealing nothing. At 1:12, Michael Larson called 911. The recording, later entered into evidence, captured his voice, tight and high. "My daughter is missing. She was in the backyard and now she's gone. I can't find her. She's 4 years old. Please send someone." The dispatcher asked standard questions. When did he last see her? What was she wearing? Any medical conditions? Could she have gone to a neighbor's house? Michael answered mechanically. Pink jacket, blue jeans, white sneakers with purple laces. No medical conditions. He had not checked with neighbors yet. He needed to keep looking. The dispatcher told him to stay on the line. Help was coming. At 1:16, Fremont County Sheriff's Deputy Robert Chen arrived at 2847 Sunset Drive. He found Michael Larson in the backyard, packing, calling Sarah Beth's name in a voice that had gone hoarse. Deputy Chen's report, filed later that day, noted that Michael appeared extremely agitated and seemed to be having difficulty focusing on questions. When asked to describe exactly what happened, Michael kept repeating that she had been right there. He could see her from the kitchen window. She was playing, and then she was gone. By 1:30, 6 deputies had arrived, along with 2 Riverton police officers. They began a grid search of the neighborhood, knocking on doors, checking backyards, garages, any place a small child might wander. Nobody had seen Sarah Beth. Nobody had heard anything unusual. The afternoon had been quiet, ordinary, unremarkable until now. At 1:45, Jennifer Larson arrived home from Safeway. Someone from the sheriff's office had called the store. Jennifer pulled into the driveway to find police vehicles lining the street, neighbors standing in clusters, a deputy stringing yellow caution tape across the backyard. She ran toward the house and Michael met her at the front door. "What happened? Where is she? What do you mean she's gone? How long was she alone?" The questions came in gasps, each one cutting deeper. By 2 o'clock, the search had expanded to a 6-block radius. Volunteers from the neighborhood joined deputies in checking every possible location. The local radio station interrupted regular programming to broadcast an alert. 4-year-old girl, blonde hair, pink jacket, missing from Sunset Drive. Anyone with information should call the sheriff's office immediately. At 2:30, tracker dogs arrived from Lander, 45 minutes away. The handlers took the dogs to Sarah Bates' bedroom, let them smell her pillow, her clothing. Then they brought them to the backyard. The dogs caught a scent immediately, followed it to the back gate, out into the alley, then south toward the intersection with Monroe Street. At Monroe, the dogs circled, confused. The scent ended there on pavement, as if Sarah Bate had simply evaporated or been picked up by a vehicle. By 3 o'clock, the FBI had been notified standard procedure for missing children under 5. By 4 o'clock, helicopters circled overhead, their rotors cutting through the autumn air. By 5 o'clock, 100 volunteers combed through drainage ditches, vacant lots, the scrub brush that bordered the residential areas. By 6 o'clock, news crews from Casper had arrived, their satellite trucks parked along Sunset Drive, their cameras capturing the growing dread. At 6:30, as the sun dropped toward the mountains and the temperature began to fall, Sheriff Thomas Reardon held a press conference in front of the Larson house. He stood on the front lawn, the porch light creating a halo behind him, his face composed but grave. "We are doing everything in our power to locate Sarah Beth Larson," he said. "We have over 100 law enforcement personnel and volunteers searching. We have dogs, helicopters, and the full resources of multiple agencies. If anyone saw anything unusual this afternoon, anything at all, please contact us immediately. Every minute counts." Michael and Jennifer Larson appeared briefly, standing on their porch, holding each other. Jennifer made a brief statement, her voice breaking. "Sarah Bate, if you can hear Mommy, we love you. We're looking for you. Please come home. To whoever has her, please, she's just a baby. Please bring her back to us." Michael said nothing, his face a mask of stone. The night brought freezing temperatures, dropping into the low 30s. Search teams continued under portable lights, the beams cutting through darkness, voices calling Sarah Bates' name across empty fields. The sound of that calling, dozens of voices repeating the same 2 words, would haunt Riverton for years to come. At midnight, the active search was suspended until dawn. Deputies remained on patrol throughout the neighborhood. The Larson house stayed lit, every window bright, as if the light might somehow guide Sarah Bate home. Inside, Michael sat at the kitchen table, staring at the backyard through the window. Jennifer lay on Sarah Bates' bed, clutching her daughter's stuffed rabbit, waiting for morning, waiting for news, waiting for anything except the terrible silence that had settled over their lives like snow. Part 2. The Investigation. Dawn on October 18th broke clear and cold, the temperature just above freezing, frost crystallizing on the brown grass of Riverton's lawns. By 6 in the morning, search teams had reassembled at the command post established in the parking lot of Little Learners Preschool. Sheriff Reardon divided volunteers into grids, each team assigned a specific area to cover. The search had expanded to a 10-mile radius, encompassing not just residential neighborhoods but ranch land, the cottonwood groves along the Wind River, abandoned buildings on the outskirts of town. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team arrived from Denver at 7:15. Special Agent Patricia Mendoza, a veteran of dozens of missing children cases, set up operations in the Sheriff's Department conference room. She brought protocol, procedure, statistics that nobody wanted to hear. After 48 hours, the chances of finding a missing child alive dropped dramatically. They were already 18 hours in. Search dogs worked the area near Monroe Street where the scent had ended the previous day. Handlers tried different approaches, different starting points, but the result remained the same. Sarah Bates' scent simply stopped at that intersection, as if she had been lifted into the air or placed into a vehicle. Deputies canvassed again, going door to door, asking if anyone had seen cars they did not recognize, strangers in the neighborhood, anything out of place on Tuesday afternoon. The answers came back negative. It had been an ordinary afternoon. Nobody saw anything. At 9 o'clock, Agent Mendoza began formal interviews with the family. She started with Jennifer Larson, walking through the morning routine, the normal patterns of the household. Jennifer described her shift at Safeway, the customers she had helped, the exact time she had left for work. She described Michael's routine with the children, how he always picked Sarah Beth up from preschool, how he was a good father, attentive, patient. When asked if there had been any problems in the marriage, any stress, Jennifer's answer was immediate and firm. No, they were fine, everything was fine. The interview with Michael Larson took place in the same conference room, beginning at 11 o'clock. Agent Mendoza's notes from that session, later obtained through court records, paint a picture of a man under enormous stress, but also a man whose answers seemed carefully constructed. When asked to describe the timeline again, Michael repeated the same sequence of events he had given deputies the previous day. Lunch at 12:15. Sarah Beth outside at 12:25. Emma down for a nap. Football game on television. Check on Sarah Beth at 1:05. Empty backyard. Why did you wait 40 minutes to check on her? Agent Mendoza asked. I didn't think it had been that long, Michael said. Time kind of. You know how it is when you're watching something. Where were you sitting? On the couch, the brown one in the living room. Can you see the backyard from the couch? No, it faces the TV. When you were in the kitchen, you said you could see her through the window. Yes. What was she doing? Michael paused here according to the notes. Playing. With the sandbox toys, I think, maybe the swing. I don't remember exactly. You don't remember? It was just, she was playing, normal playing. Those who knew Michael Larson said he was not normally a vague man. He was a mechanic, trained to notice details, to remember sequences, to be precise. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the inconsistencies in his timeline, the way certain details became sharper in each retelling while others grew hazier. The physical evidence team worked the Larson property with meticulous care. They photographed the backyard from every angle, measured distances, documented the position of toys. The swing hung at a slight angle, as if recently used. The dump truck lay on its side near the sandbox, a small handprint visible in the dust on its yellow plastic. The back gate showed no signs of forced entry, but the latch mechanism was loose, could be opened with minimal pressure. Tire impressions in the alley behind the house were photographed and cast in plaster, but analysis would later show them to be from the garbage truck that serviced the area every Tuesday morning. No unusual prints, no fresh disturbances. The gravel in the alley had been dry, not ideal for preserving evidence. Inside the house, investigators noted the layout. The kitchen window did indeed provide a clear view of the backyard, but only if you were standing at the sink or near the counter. The living room couch faced away from all windows. From that position, you could hear the television, the football announcers describing plays, but you could not see outside, could not see a child playing, could not see anything except the wall-mounted TV and the coffee table with its scattered magazines. At 2 o'clock on that second day, divers entered the Wind River at several access points, searching the murky water for any sign of Sarah Beth. They found nothing but debris, old tires, the rusted skeleton of a shopping cart. Helicopters continued their grid pattern overhead, thermal imaging cameras searching for heat signatures in the brush and ravines. Nothing. The media presence intensified. CNN sent a crew from their Denver bureau. Sarah Bates' photograph appeared on the evening news nationwide, that gap-toothed smile frozen in time from a birthday party 6 months earlier. The tip line established by the sheriff's department received hundreds of calls. Psychics claimed to have visions. Conspiracy theorists offered elaborate explanations. Every lead had to be followed, investigated, ruled out. None of them led anywhere. On October 19th, the third day, a volunteer searcher found a small pink jacket in a ravine 2 miles from the Larson house. For 20 terrible minutes, everyone believed they had found Sarah Bates' jacket. Then Jennifer identified it as the wrong shade of pink, the wrong size, belonging to some other child from some other time. The jacket was collected as evidence anyway, logged and cataloged, but it was not Sarah Bates. Agent Mendoza returned to the Larson house that afternoon, accompanied by a child forensic psychologist. They wanted to speak with the neighbors again, wanted to understand the geography of relationships on Sunset Drive. The Hendersons, who lived directly behind the Larsons, shared a fence line with them. Carol Henderson told agents that she had been home that Tuesday afternoon doing laundry in her basement. She had not heard anything unusual. No car engines, no voices, no sounds of distress. Just an ordinary afternoon. But when pressed, Carol mentioned something else. "I saw Michael in the backyard," she said, "earlier before lunch. He was checking the fence near the gate. I thought it was strange because he usually doesn't pay much attention to yard maintenance." What time was this? Maybe 11:30. Right after he picked up Sarah Bate from preschool. I remember because I was hanging sheets on the line and I saw him through the fence slats. This detail had not appeared in Michael's account of the day. When Agent Mendoza asked him about it during a follow-up interview, Michael seemed confused. "I might have looked at the gate," he said. "I don't really remember. Maybe the latch was sticking. I don't know why that matters." But it mattered to investigators because it suggested Michael had been concerned about the gate earlier in the day, had perhaps noticed it was not latching properly, yet had still allowed Sarah Bate to play alone in a backyard with an unsecured exit to the alley. On October 20th, the fourth day, Sheriff Reardon made the difficult decision to scale back the active search. They had covered hundreds of square miles. They had searched every building, every culvert, every abandoned property within a 20-mile radius. They had drained a stock pond on the theory that Sarah Bate might have wandered there. They had followed leads from California to Maine, none of them credible. The FBI profilers said that if this was an abduction by a stranger, Sarah Bate was likely no longer in Wyoming. If it was something else, they needed to look closer to home. The question that nobody wanted to ask, but that hung over the investigation like smoke, was simple. What if Sarah Bate had never left the property? What if something had happened in that house, in that yard, before 1:05? Polygraph examinations were scheduled for both Michael and Jennifer Larson on October 23rd. Jennifer agreed immediately, appeared at the sheriff's department at the appointed time, answered every question while connected to the machine. The examiner's report indicated no deception. Jennifer believed what she was saying. She had been at work. She did not know what happened to her daughter. Michael Larson agreed to the polygraph but requested to reschedule, citing exhaustion. He rescheduled twice more over the following week. When he finally appeared for the examination on November 2nd, his attorney, Robert Finch, accompanied him. This was Michael's right, and nobody could compel him to take the test without counsel, but the optics troubled investigators. Innocent parents desperate to find their children rarely lawyer up. The polygraph proceeded under careful protocols. Michael answered baseline questions calmly. When asked, "Do you know what happened to Sarah Beth?" he answered, "No." When asked, "Did you harm Sarah Beth?" he answered, "No." When asked, "Is Sarah Beth alive?" he hesitated for 3 full seconds before answering, "I don't know." The examiner concluded that the results were inconclusive, showing indicators of stress but not definitive deception. This was not unusual in cases involving traumatic events. Grief and fear could produce the same physiological responses as lying. But investigators noted that Michael's stress levels were highest when answering questions about the timeline, about what he was doing between 12:30 and 1 o'clock. The community of Riverton, meanwhile, was fracturing under the weight of suspicion and fear. Some residents refused to believe that Michael could be involved. He was a good man, a devoted father, a mechanic who went to church on Sundays and coached t-ball in the summer. Others pointed to the inconsistencies, the timeline gaps, the fact that he had been the only adult present when Sarah Beth vanished. Whispers circulated at the grocery store, at the gas station, at the tables of the Cowboy Cafe on Main Street. Jennifer stood by her husband, appeared with him at vigils, held his hand during press conferences. But those who knew her well said something had changed in her eyes, a flicker of doubt that she tried to hide but could not quite extinguish. Clears throat. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt that terrible cognitive dissonance between what you want to believe and what the evidence whispers, Jennifer's private agony in those weeks was almost unbearable. By November, the active investigation had essentially stalled. The FBI had moved on to other cases. The state police maintained the file as open but devoted minimal resources. Tips still came in occasionally, but none led anywhere. Sarah Beth Larson had disappeared as completely as if she had been erased from existence, and the only person who might know what really happened maintained his story with unwavering consistency. He did not know. She was playing. She was gone. The holidays that year were unbearable for the Larson family. Thanksgiving passed in silence. Christmas arrived with Sarah Beth's stocking hanging on the mantel next to Emma's, empty and accusatory. The investigation, for all practical purposes, had gone cold. The case remained open, but nobody was actively working it. Sarah Beth's file sat in a cabinet at the sheriff's department, just another unsolved disappearance in a world full of them. Part 3. The Silence. January of 1996 brought heavy snow to central Wyoming, drifts piling against houses, roads becoming tunnels through white walls. The Larson house on Sunset Drive stood dark most evenings, the curtains drawn, the cheerful lights of other homes in the neighborhood making it seem even more isolated. Inside, Michael and Jennifer moved through their daily routines like automatons, speaking only when necessary, avoiding each other's eyes. Emma, now 2 years old, asked about her sister constantly. "Where's Sarah? Where's Sarah go?" Jennifer had no answer that a toddler could understand. She said Sarah was with the angels, but Emma looked at the ceiling, confused, seeing no one there. Michael said nothing about Sarah Beth at all, as if speaking her name might shatter whatever fragile control he was maintaining. The marriage, already strained by the investigation, began to crack along invisible fault lines. Jennifer returned to work at Safeway, grateful for the routine, for the forced normalcy of scanning groceries and making small talk with customers. Michael worked longer hours at the auto shop, sometimes not coming home until after dark. They slept in the same bed but occupied different universes, the space between them filled with everything they could not say. In March, Jennifer's mother, Patricia Chambers, came to stay for a few weeks. Patricia had been pushing for this visit since November, convinced that her daughter was not coping well, that something was very wrong beyond the obvious tragedy. What she found when she arrived confirmed her worst fears. Jennifer had lost weight, her clothes hanging loose. The house, usually immaculate, showed signs of neglect. Dishes in the sink, dust on the furniture. Sarah Bates' room exactly as it had been on October 17th, untouched, a shrine. Patricia cleaned and cooked and tried to coax her daughter into conversation, but Jennifer remained distant, distracted. She would start sentences and not finish them. She would stand in Sarah Bates' doorway for long minutes, just staring. At night, Patricia heard her daughter crying through the walls, soft sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken. Michael avoided Patricia entirely, leaving early for work, coming home late, eating dinner alone in his truck before finally entering the house. On the rare occasions when they were in the same room, Patricia watched her son-in-law with growing unease. He did not seem like a man grieving. He seemed like a man waiting for something, though what, she could not say. One evening in late March, after Michael had gone to bed, Patricia sat with Jennifer at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Emma's white noise machine. Patricia took her daughter's hand and asked the question she had been holding for months. "Do you think Michael knows something?" Jennifer pulled her hand away as if burned. "Don't," she said. "Don't even say that. I'm your mother, I need to ask." He was cleared. The police investigated him. They didn't find anything. "That's not what I asked." Jennifer stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the dark backyard. The swing set was covered in snow, the sandbox buried. "I can't think about that," she said finally. "If I start thinking about that, I won't be able to keep going." But the thought once voiced could not be unthought. It lived in the house with them now, another presence, another weight. In June of 1996, 8 months after Sarah Bates' disappearance, Jennifer took Emma and moved in with her mother in Casper, 90 miles away. She told Michael it was temporary, that she needed some time, that the house on Sunset Drive had too many memories. Michael did not argue. He helped load boxes into her car, kissed Emma goodbye, and watched them drive away. Then he went inside and closed all the curtains. The separation was supposed to last a month. It lasted 3 years. During that time, Michael lived alone in the house, maintaining his job at the auto shop, keeping to himself. He attended a few support group meetings for parents of missing children but stopped going after other parents expressed discomfort with his presence. The whispers had never fully stopped. People remembered his inconsistent statements, his lawyering up, the way he had seemed too controlled, too calm in those early days. Jennifer, meanwhile, tried to build a new life in Casper. She got a job at a different grocery store, enrolled Emma in daycare, started seeing a therapist who specialized in complicated grief. The therapist asked her about her marriage, about Michael, about whether she felt safe. Jennifer said yes, she felt safe. Michael had never been violent, never raised his voice. But when the therapist asked if she trusted her husband, Jennifer could not answer. Emma grew from a toddler into a young child, bright and energetic, but troubled by dreams. She woke up screaming about someone taking her sister, about bad things in the backyard. Jennifer held her and soothed her and wondered what a 2-year-old could remember, what shadows remained from that terrible day. In 1997, Jennifer filed for divorce. The proceedings were quiet, uncontested. Michael signed the papers without protest. They divided their minimal assets. Michael kept the house on Sunset Drive. Jennifer took the car and the furniture and custody of Emma. Michael had visitation rights every other weekend, but he rarely exercised them. The drive to Casper felt too long, and Emma barely remembered him. The years passed. 1998 became 1999, became 2000, the new millennium arriving with fireworks and celebrations that felt hollow to everyone connected to the Larson case. Sarah Bate would have been 9 years old. Jennifer marked the birthday quietly, a cake with candles that nobody blew out, a prayer to a daughter who might be anywhere or nowhere. Michael Larson remained in Riverton, a ghost in his own life. He went to work, came home, watched television in the living room where he had been sitting when Sarah Beth disappeared. The neighbors who remained on Sunset Drive avoided him. Parents told their children not to go near his house. He was not convicted of anything, not even formally accused, but the court of public opinion had rendered its verdict. In 2003, Emma turned 10. She had grown up hearing the story of her missing sister, had seen the photographs, had absorbed her mother's grief like osmosis. But she had no real memories of Sarah Beth, just fragments that might have been dreams or constructed from stories. There was one thing she did remember, though, or thought she remembered: a shovel. Someone putting a shovel in the trunk of a car. The smell of fresh dirt. But the memory was hazy, disconnected from time and place, and when she mentioned it to her mother, Jennifer dismissed it as a dream, a confusion. For those who have ever lost someone without closure, who have lived with questions that have no answers, who have felt the particular torture of not knowing, the decade that followed Sarah Beth's disappearance represented a slow kind of suffocation. The case remained officially open but practically dead. The file at the Fremont County Sheriff's Department gathered dust. The investigators who had worked the case retired or moved on. Sheriff Riverton himself passed away in 2009, taking whatever insights he had gained with him. But truth, like water, has a way of finding cracks, of seeping through barriers, of emerging when least expected. In 2018, 23 years after Sarah Beth vanished, Emma Larson, now 25 years old and living in Boise, Idaho, began experiencing severe anxiety attacks. They started without warning, left her gasping for breath, convinced she was dying. Her doctor referred her to a therapist who specialized in trauma. Over the course of several months working through the anxiety, Emma began recovering memories that had been buried for more than 2 decades. They came in fragments at first, disconnected images that did not make sense. A pink jacket, her father's hands, the backyard, dirt under fingernails, the smell of exhaust, and slowly, piece by piece, the fragments assembled themselves into a narrative that Emma did not want to believe but could not deny. She was in the living room in her playpen. Sarah Beth was outside. She heard voices through the window, her father's voice, sharp and angry, unusual because he never raised his voice. She heard crying, then silence. Then her father coming inside, breathing hard, washing his hands at the kitchen sink over and over, then carrying something wrapped in a blanket to the garage, then the sound of the car starting. Then coming back inside and picking her up, holding her too tight, saying everything was going to be okay. Sarah just went away for a while. Emma recorded these memories in a journal her therapist suggested keeping. She was not sure they were real. Memory is tricky, especially childhood memory, especially memory connected to trauma. But the more she wrote, the more detail emerged. Claire's throat, the specific pattern of the linoleum in the kitchen, the color of the blanket, blue and yellow stripes, the way her father's shirt had dirt on it when he came back from the garage. In December of 2018, Emma called her mother for the first time in 3 months. Their relationship had been strained for years, Jennifer's grief creating a wall that Emma could never quite scale. But Emma needed to ask questions that only her mother could answer. What color was Sarah Beth's jacket that day? Pink. What blankets did they have in the house in 1995? Jennifer thought for a moment. Several, but Sarah Beth's favorite had blue and yellow stripes, a gift from her grandmother. Emma felt her stomach drop. What was the floor in the kitchen? She asked. Linoleum, brown pattern, kind of ugly. Why are you asking these things? I think I remember something, Emma said. From that day, I think I saw something. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long that Emma thought the call had dropped. Then Jennifer's voice, very quiet, very controlled. What do you remember? Emma told her mother everything. The memories, the therapy, the journal entries, the fragments that had assembled into a terrible picture. When she finished, Jennifer was crying, not the soft crying Emma had heard so many times before, but deep, wrenching sobs. "He told me you were asleep," Jennifer finally said. "That whole day, every time I asked, he said you were asleep in your crib. You couldn't have seen anything because you were asleep." "I wasn't asleep," Emma said. "I remember being awake. I remember my playpen. I remember looking through the bars. I remember." Part 4. The Revelation. On January 15, 2019, Emma Larson made a formal statement to the Boise Police Department, who immediately contacted the Fremont County Sheriff's Department in Wyoming. The case file was pulled from storage, dusted off, reviewed by a new generation of investigators who had been in high school when Sarah Beth disappeared. Detective Marcus Webb, who had joined the department in 2010, was assigned to re-examine the evidence in light of Emma's testimony. The statement Emma gave ran to 47 pages of transcript. She described what she remembered in exhaustive detail, knowing that memory alone would not be enough, that she would need corroboration, that a defense attorney would shred childhood memories on the stand. But she also provided something else, a possible location. She remembered the sound of the garage door opening and closing, the car starting, the time that passed. She estimated her father had been gone maybe 30 minutes, maybe 45. Not long enough to go far, but long enough to get out of town. Detective Webb pulled the original case file and found something interesting. During the initial investigation, deputies had checked Michael Larson's vehicle, a 1989 Ford Ranger pickup, for evidence. They had noted the mileage, 47,312 miles. 3 days later, when Michael had given permission for a more thorough search of the vehicle, the mileage was 47,351 miles. 39 miles driven in 3 days, during a period when Michael had claimed to be staying home, except for short trips to the grocery store and gas station. Webb pulled maps of the area surrounding Riverton. 39 miles round trip could take you to several locations. The Wind River, but they had searched that extensively. Ranch land to the south. The Red Desert to the southwest. Abandoned homesteads scattered throughout Fremont County. He created a radius map, circling all locations within 20 miles of Sunset Drive. On February 3, 2019, Detective Webb drove to the Wyoming State Prison in Rawlins to interview an inmate named Curtis Yates. Yates had worked at Bighorn Tire and Auto in 1995, had known Michael Larson, had been interviewed briefly during the original investigation. He was now serving 15 years for unrelated property crimes. Webb thought it was worth asking if Yates remembered anything about Michael's behavior in the days after Sarah Beth disappeared. The interview, conducted in a gray cinder block room, started slowly. Yates was suspicious, uncooperative, until Webb explained that new evidence had emerged in the Larson case. Then something shifted in Yates' expression. He leaned forward. "You know he did it, right?" Yates said. "I've known for 24 years, but nobody would listen." Webb turned on his recorder. "Tell me what you know." Yates told a story he claimed to have kept secret for more than 2 decades. On October 18, 1995, the day after Sarah Beth disappeared, Michael had come to work at the auto shop. This was unusual because Michael had been told to take time off to be with his family. But he showed up anyway, said he needed to work, needed something normal. Yates and Michael had been alone in the shop around noon. Michael was working under a truck when Yates noticed fresh scratches on his forearms, the kind you get from brush or branches. "I asked him about the scratches," Yates said. "He got real defensive, said he'd been searching for Sarah Beth, that he'd been out in the fields. But the thing is, I'd been out with the search teams too. We'd all been together. and Michael hadn't been with us. He'd stayed at the house that day with the police and the FBI. Did you tell anyone about this? I mentioned it to one of the deputies, but they brushed it off. Said Michael was probably doing his own searching, checking places near his house. They weren't interested in what I had to say. Yates remembered something else. About a week after Sarah Beth disappeared, Michael had asked to borrow Yates' truck for a few hours. Said his own truck was making a noise. He wanted to drive something else to diagnose the problem. Yates had agreed, and Michael had returned the truck 5 hours later, the truck bed dirty with soil, dried mud on the tires. I asked him about it, and he said he'd driven out to check some ravines near his family's old property, that he thought maybe Sarah Beth had wandered that direction. But he was real vague about where exactly he'd been. And the thing that stuck with me all these years was how calm he was. Not like a man looking for his daughter, like a man ticking items off a checklist. Webb took detailed notes, obtained permission to include Yates' statement in the investigation file. It was not proof, but it was another piece, another inconsistency that fit the pattern Emma's memories had revealed. Throughout the spring and summer of 2019, Detective Webb worked the case methodically. He re-interviewed everyone from 1995 who was still alive and could be located. He brought in forensic anthropologists to consult on where a body might have been hidden in Fremont County. He used ground-penetrating radar at several likely locations within the 20-mile radius, searching for disturbances in the soil that matched the timeline. Nothing definitive emerged, but Webb was building a case, piece by piece. In September 2019, Webb received a call from a hospice nurse in Cheyenne. She was caring for a terminal patient who had something to confess about an old case in Fremont County. Webb drove to Cheyenne the next day and found himself sitting beside the bed of Gerald Polk, 79 years old, dying of lung cancer, connected to oxygen and morphine drips. Polk had worked as a maintenance supervisor at the Fremont County landfill in 1995. He was not from Riverton originally, had moved away in 1997, had spent the last 2 decades in Cheyenne, never thinking about his time at the landfill until the cancer diagnosis made him contemplate the weight of his soul. He told Webb something that had bothered him for 24 years, but that he had rationalized away, because getting involved seemed too complicated, too risky. On October 18, 1995, late in the afternoon, around 5 o'clock, after the landfill had officially closed, a man had driven through the gates. Polk had been doing final rounds, checking the compactors. The man had a pickup truck, asked if he could dump some construction debris. This was against protocol, but people did it sometimes, and Polk had looked the other way. The man had driven to one of the active fill areas, dumped something wrapped in plastic and blankets, then left quickly. Polk had not thought much about it at the time. People dumped all kinds of things. But then the news about the missing girl came out, and Polk had seen the father's picture, and he had realized it was the same man from the landfill. He told himself he could not be sure, that the lighting had been poor, that lots of people drove pickup trucks. He told himself getting involved would mean accusations, investigations, questions he did not want to answer about why he had let someone dump after hours. "I should have said something," Polk rasped, the oxygen hissing beside him. "I knew it was wrong, I knew, and I said nothing. I need to tell someone before I meet my maker." Webb showed Polk a photograph of Michael Larson from 1995. "Is this the man?" Polk studied the photo for a long moment, his breathing labored. Then he nodded. "Yeah, that's him, I'm sure." Webb asked if Polk could identify the location within the landfill where the material had been dumped. Polk drew a crude map on a piece of paper, his hand shaking. The area he indicated had been active in 1995, but had since been covered with additional fill, compacted, closed. Excavating it would require significant resources, court orders, and the cooperation of multiple agencies. On October 17, 2019, exactly 24 years after Sarah Beth Larson disappeared, Detective Webb presented his findings to the Fremont County District Attorney. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Emma's recovered memories, Curtis Yates' observations, Gerald Polk's deathbed confession, the unexplained mileage on Michael's truck, the timeline inconsistencies that had never been adequately explained. The DA agreed to seek a warrant for Michael Larson's arrest. On October 21, 2019, at 6 a.m, Detective Webb and 4 other officers arrived at 2847 Sunset Drive. Michael Larson, now 53 years old, answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt. Webb identified himself, though they had met several times over the past months as the investigation had intensified. "Michael Larson, you are under arrest for the murder of Sarah Beth Larson." Michael did not seem surprised. He did not ask questions. He simply turned around, put his hands behind his back, and allowed himself to be handcuffed. As he was walked to the patrol car, a neighbor filming on her phone captured his face in profile. He looked tired, older than his years, but also relieved, as if he had been waiting for this moment for 24 years. The arrest made national news within hours. The case that had gone cold in 1995 was suddenly alive again, the headlines screaming about recovered memories, deathbed confessions, a father accused of murdering his own child. The comment sections on news websites filled with rage, speculation, and the inevitable debates about memory reliability and burden of proof. Jennifer Larson, reached by reporters at her home in Casper, released a brief statement through an attorney. "I have waited 24 years for answers about what happened to my daughter. I pray that the legal system will finally provide those answers and that Sarah Beth will receive the justice she deserves." Emma Larson did not speak to the press. She released a written statement that said simply, "I have spent my entire life knowing something was wrong. I am relieved that the truth is finally being heard, and I hope that my sister can finally rest in peace." The preliminary hearing took place in November 2019. Michael Larson, represented by a public defender, pleaded not guilty. The defense argued that the case was built on unreliable childhood memories, a deathbed statement from a man on high-dose morphine, and circumstantial evidence that proved nothing. The prosecution countered that the totality of the evidence, when viewed together, told a clear and damning story. The hearing to excavate the specified section of the Fremont County landfill was granted in December 2019. The excavation began on January 7, 2020, using heavy equipment and forensic archaeology techniques. Teams sifted through decades of compacted refuse, garbage, construction debris, looking for human remains in a 40-foot square area that Polk's map had indicated. On January 11, 2020, 15 feet below the current surface, workers found bones wrapped in deteriorated plastic sheeting and fragments of a blue and yellow striped blanket. Forensic analysis confirmed they were the remains of a child approximately 4 years old. DNA testing, using samples from Jennifer and Emma, confirmed identity. Sarah Beth Larson had been found. The news reached Riverton like an earthquake. The community that had lived with uncertainty for nearly 25 years now had terrible certainty. Vigils were held at Little Learners Preschool, now under different ownership but still operating. Flowers and stuffed animals piled up on the fence of 2847 Sunset Drive. People wept openly in the aisles of the Safeway where Jennifer had once worked. Michael Larson's trial was scheduled for September 2020, but was delayed multiple times due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It finally began in March 2021. The prosecution presented Emma's testimony, Polk's statement, Yates' observations, the forensic evidence from the landfill, the inconsistencies in Michael's original statements, the unexplained mileage, the timeline that never quite added up. The defense argued that none of this proved murder, that Sarah Beth could have died accidentally and Michael, in panic and fear, could have made terrible decisions to cover it up rather than face scrutiny. Emma testified for 6 hours, walking the jury through her memories, acknowledging the gaps, the uncertainties, but also describing the images that had stayed with her. Her father's hands washing over and over, the dirt on his shirt, the blue and yellow blanket, the sound of the garage door. Defense attorneys hammered her on cross-examination. How could she remember details from age 2? Couldn't these be false memories, constructed from photographs and stories? Emma remained calm, certain. "I know what I saw," she said. "I've known my whole life, I just didn't understand it until now." The jury deliberated for 11 hours. On March 23, 2021, they returned a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder, guilty of abuse of a corpse, guilty of obstruction of justice. Michael Larson showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table in front of him, as if he had always known this was how it would end. Sentencing took place in May 2021. The judge sentenced Michael Larson to 40 years to life in prison. Before the sentence was announced, Michael was given an opportunity to make a statement. He stood, faced the courtroom, and for the first time in 26 years, he spoke the truth. "I never meant to hurt her," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. Sarah Beth was being difficult that day. She wouldn't come inside for her nap. She kept running away, laughing like it was a game. I grabbed her arm too hard. She fell, hit her head on the edge of the sandbox. I thought she was just stunned, but then she wouldn't wake up. I tried CPR. Nothing worked. I panicked. I thought everyone would blame me, would think I did it on purpose, so I hid her. I drove to the landfill. I came home and called 911 and pretended she had just disappeared. I've lived with it every day since. I deserve whatever happens to me." The courtroom erupted. Jennifer Larson stood up, screaming, "You let me think she might be alive. You let me hope for years." Emma sat with her face in her hands, sobbing. The judge gavelled for order and Michael was led away in handcuffs, returning to the cell where he would spend the rest of his life. Closing. The case of Sarah Beth Larson stands as a reminder that truth, however long buried, however carefully hidden, eventually finds its way to the surface. It stands as a testament to the power of memory, the persistence of investigators who refuse to let cases go cold, and the courage of a daughter who spoke up even when speaking up meant shattering what remained of her family. Sarah Beth was finally laid to rest in Riverton Cemetery on June 12, 2021, 26 years after she disappeared from her backyard on an October afternoon. Her gravestone is simple pink granite, engraved with her name, her dates, and a single line: "Forever for, forever loved, forever remembered." For those who have ever doubted, who have ever wondered if their voice matters, if their truth is worth telling, consider Emma Larson, who spent 23 years carrying fragments of memory that made no sense until they suddenly made all the sense in the world. Consider Gerald Polk, who waited until his deathbed to unburden his conscience. Consider the investigators who kept returning to inconsistencies that others dismissed. Justice came late for Sarah Beth Larson, but it came. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard, may still be carrying truth that needs to be spoken, may still be seeking justice for a voice that was silenced. Every story told is a step toward remembering that the disappeared are not forgotten, that the lost are not beyond finding, that silence can be broken, and truth, however painful, is always better than lies.